Welcome to the Growth Minded Accountant podcast, where our experts will share best practices on running your firm in the digital age. This podcast is brought to you by CountingWorks Pro. Let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Minded Accountant. My name is Lee Reams. I'm the founder and CEO of CountingWorks, and today's topic is the firm down the street publishes the same insights you do. So this is kind of a continuation of the cookie cutter is dead theme that I've been talking about for some time, but more importantly, starting to understand how the landscape has changed on getting you recommended by ChatGPT and tools like that. So I wanted to start today with something that I think describes a huge part of the tax and accounting marketing space right now. You know, the firm down the street publishes the same insights you do. And specifically in our vertical, unfortunately, we have a couple companies that have lots of thousands of websites, and they're doing the exact same content for every single firm, right? And then for some firms, I'm actually being generous. At least they're posting. So there's fresh content going. So if you look across the tax and accounting profession, I think most firms' websites fall into one of three categories. So, and the first is what I call the designed, launched, and forgotten website. And before I get too far, Rebecca, say hello, and let's jump into this fully.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is a really important topic, so I'm excited that we're getting into it today.
Yeah, and the forgotten website, I call it a dinosaur site. Someone at the firm, a partner, had a cousin who's doing WordPress sites, and they decided, let's build a new website. And then they spent the money, probably more than they expected. They worked through the design. They had a full committee, deciding what bio was approved. And, everyone debated which photo to add, and the website launched. And then everyone loved it when it launched. And maybe even what we usually see is about one or maybe two blog posts, and then crickets. 3 years later, that website looks almost exactly like it did on launch day. So that's kind of category one, not a DIY, but it definitely kind of, puts a certain group of people, what they have done. So the second one is, unfortunately to me, the worst one you could do is the cookie cutter website. So in our profession, as I mentioned, has lots of these. Same basic design, the same old dated photography, the same service pages, the same copy headline, the same monthly tax articles across everybody, the same language about being that trusted partner. If you swap the logo at the top, it could belong literally to any other tax and accounting firm. And more importantly, it's a firm 1 mile away or 5 miles away. And the consumer looks at like, what's the difference between these, right? And then I think you're starting to see a third category emerge, and that's what I'm going to call the AI content factory. And there's good parts about this, but then really, really bad parts. So someone says, hey, we solved our content problem. AI can write 4 blogs a month for you. I've seen offers on the internet, on social. We're going to create an army of writers and agents for you, and that's fantastic. Except now we've got thousands of firms publishing the same generic AI-produced articles. 5 tax tips every small business owner should know. Should your business become an S corp? Year-end tax planning strategies, and the content may be accurate. Most likely, it is not. Because if you just have a generic model working on it, I don't know if it has the tax insight. I don't know if it's updated to the tax code. What we've seen is no, but it can write very well. But does it know your audience? Does it know your firm, right? Is there a narrative? Is there a real point of view? There might be no understanding of why that particular firm, that particular piece, because they don't specialize in that, right? So, what I see is there's no connection. The firm is actually trying to grow. It's kind of like throwing everything against the wall and see what sticks. So we went from websites that published nothing to websites publishing the same thing over and over again at AI scale and AI slop, right? So, we basically have AI trying to publish a whole lot more of the same exact thing, right? So none of these really solve the marketing problem, Rebecca. And I think that's where we want to start, kind of going into what our first section here is. Your website is not a marketing strategy. There's much more to this. So try to expand on this a little bit. I kind of set you up, and then we'll jump into some really good details of what you should be doing and how to do it.
Absolutely. So there is kind of this misconception that because a firm has a website and it looks professional, the marketing has been handled. But having a website and having a marketing strategy, unfortunately, are not the same thing. So a website is going to be your infrastructure. It is the roadmap, basically. It's your highway. But you have to build on that to actually have something that matters. So think about everything that shifts after, your website initially launches. So your firm might change. You might start offering new services. You might change packages. Your pricing might shift. Your clients might change. You might develop a niche that you didn't have before, for example. The area you live in might shift, drawing in a new demographic of people. That opens up a new world of clientele. Tax laws will inevitably change. Services are likely to change as the world goes more toward advisory, for example. More and more firms are offering advisory services. Maybe you discover that you really enjoy working with a certain type of industry that you didn't realize before that you liked. So things shift. Also, Google changes, AI search changes, mapping systems change. Nothing is static, right? Life is change and the internet is change. But if your website stays exactly the same as it was 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, that's the problem with thinking of your website as a one-time project. It needs to be an evolving project because the world around you is evolving and your website has to be able to keep up.
Yeah, I think more importantly too, your competitors change. So where you may have been recommended or ranking, so to speak, in certain topics, someone's outflanked you. Maybe a new competitor came in that's doing a better job at telling their narrative. So I think what we're trying to, and successfully have done, is understand building your website is not a one-time event. This is a living document. This is a living, it's almost like you want to make sure that your talking points, what's working, what's not, are evolving with you. Okay. So the whole idea of design, built, launched, and done, that isn't really going to get you where you want to go. Okay. So, and this goes back to what I call the cookie cutter problem, and that's the lack of narrative. And what you're seeing, and this is where you start getting what I'll call AI slop. So if there's no real point of view, your expertise is really not integrated into the content that you're creating. You don't have a target audience for the content that you're creating. That is a big problem. So let's get into what a cookie cutter website looks like, what is wrong with it, and why there's a better alternative.
Yeah, so we're going to really dive in here. And the first thing I want to say is that these templates are not inherently bad. They were made to make websites affordable. They allowed small firms to actually be able to get online without spending an arm and a leg that they maybe couldn't afford. That does have value. The issue is that the template cannot become the marketing strategy. And that's what happened time and time again with these cookie cutter sites, is that firms would pay the one-time fee to have it launched, and then they would just assume that everything was kind of running behind the scenes when that wasn't always the case. So if you look at enough accounting websites, you'll see the same exact verbiage.
Don't laugh too hard, Rebecca. I know. It's okay. You've seen it, you've done it, and again, go ahead.
So things like, we provide personalized tax solutions. We're your trusted advisor. We help individuals and businesses achieve their financial goals. These all sound great, but it doesn't really tell people anything about your firm. Like, who are you? Who are you especially good at working with? What do you believe? How do you think the tax and accounting professional and client relationship should look? What problems can you solve better than other firms? What kind of client would look at your website and instantly think, this firm is for me? That's where differentiation is important, and it's what differentiation is supposed to do. If we can replace your logo, like Lee said earlier, with any other logo and the website still tracks, that's not what you want in this day and age. So the same thing happened with content libraries. For many years, firms were given kind of pre-written articles, pre-written newsletters, because it did solve a problem. It allowed them to have access to content to put out there into the world when they didn't have time to create fully custom work. So That was great in that time period. But if hundreds of other firms are publishing basically the same thing, we're back to the exact same question and back to square one. Why should someone choose you specifically? So that's where AI has come in and the world has started changing again.
Yeah, and it's obviously changed content creation. I always call it the blank page state, and that's what AI is best of. It's great when you get an email from a client in your inbox, and now AI can pre-draft a response to that because it researched what the question was asking. It figures out the tone, the intent of the email, and then it can basically get you 95% of the way there. You make a couple changes, maybe you make an edit here or there, and you're done. An article, same thing. You want an article, you can have one in 30 seconds, right? You want 5 social posts? Done. You want a newsletter? Done. You want to write an FAQ? Done. Service page? You get the idea. So there's massive productivity improvements, but this is where AI did not automatically answer the question, should you create that article in the first place? That's where we're missing. We solved production, but before we've actually solved a strategy. So when production becomes almost free, or at least in your mind, it's free, simply producing something becomes less valuable, and that's economics, right? So if everyone can create unlimited content itself isn't scarce anymore. Knowledge is not scarce anymore. But what is scarce is expertise, your expertise, years of experience, right? Relevance to an audience, right? Does this content actually resonate with me? Original thinking. Oh my, what is that anymore, right? Specificity. So are you specifically targeting something? Are you saying something about something? Trust, right? Understanding the audience. We just did, Mike and I, our director of tax intelligence yesterday, did we do tax updates, and he was going into some really complex things, and it just made me step back again. And sometimes maybe even I forget how complex the tax and accounting space is. And this is just about a particular tax credit for businesses and paid leave and insurance policies. And it was a simple kind of concept, but we went through 20 some minutes just explaining it and how you break that down to a client and decide, should we do it? Should we not? There's a lot to it. If I were writing to that audience, I need to understand exactly what they're going through. And, is this something valuable to them? And, is it worth me actually saying it to my client, right? And I think that's where, again, AI kind of doesn't have that judgment. So AI didn't fix what I'll call bad tax and accounting for marketing. And actually, in some ways, it made it even worse. So if firms are putting out a bunch of slop, they're putting out more slop than ever. So if there's no strategy, there's no narrative, no audience, no point of view, and no connection between, what you're publishing and what you're trying to grow, then AI just lets you produce more generic material, I guess faster is a way to look at it. So I don't think that is where the opportunity is. I think narrative has to come first. So, you're an accounting firm and you tell AI, hey, write me an article about tax planning for dentists. I think this is a really good example. You'll probably get a pretty good article. It will come up with things you probably didn't even think about, right? But I would say let's approach this differently. So let's tell the system, hey, we're an accounting firm that has developed a significant dental practice niche, right? And we're giving it context. We're giving it background for the prompt because we want a better output. And we're letting AI help us write the article versus write an article. So, we work with dentists from the point of view where, they're considering buying into a practice, for example, through growth, expansion, bringing in partners, and eventually actually trying to sell the practice. So we're trying to become the firm dentists in our market associate with the entire financial journey. So if you just ask AI to write that one article versus added 3 levels of context, I think you're getting a much better output. So I think you see where I'm going. So let's now ask, hey, what are these dentists actually worried about? Buying into a practice, how much debt should they take on? Should they own the building? How should the practice be structured, the entity, right? How much should they pay themselves? When should they buy equipment? When do they bring in another associate? We see that often right now, right? How do they structure a buy-in? What's the practice actually worth on the market, right? What happens when they're ready to sell? So now we've got something, right? We're not brainstorming some random blog topics anymore. We're building a body of expertise around a specific audience and a specific narrative. And that narrative might be, hey, we help dentists make better financial decisions at every stage of practice ownership. Now the website can start proving that. And this is how AI and content creation really starts working well. So that your service page backs up this story. The article backs it up. The FAQs reinforce it. They're all starting to work together, okay? This narrative is interweaved between all your content. So if you did case studies, it reinforces it. Your newsletter reinforces it. Any videos you've created do the same, right? So everything starts telling a coherent story. That's strategy. That is marketing. And that's the step that most people, Rebecca, I would say almost everyone is just neglecting. They're just going and running with it. And they're they're running a 100-yard dash as fast as they can versus doing it as a marathon and really thinking through strategy and what I'm going to do. So AI is simply helping us execute it at scale. And that wasn't economically possible before, and now it does. So let's start talking about kind of the content calendar and how you now turn this into an opportunity engine, Rebecca.
Right. So the path forward has really changed from what we traditionally thought of when we thought of content strategy and content creation. So the old question was, what are we going to publish this month? So that's where the concept of content calendars became a thing. In January, we're going to write this. We're going to publish 3 times a week. February, we're going to write this. March, this. And there's nothing wrong with planning content. That's actually helpful for many people to have it laid out. However, what if instead we ask, where does my firm have an opportunity to demonstrate expertise right now? It helps you to create more topical articles that have more likelihood of getting shared across social media, more likelihood of getting recommended when people are searching for newsworthy topics. So this is important. Also, clients might be asking you the same question over and over again based upon things that are happening in the world or, different things going on in their lives. If you are getting the same question 5 or 10 times a week, that's a massive opportunity for you. That should be an alarm bell going off like, hey, we should be publishing content about this yesterday. So maybe a service that the firm wants to grow is barely represented on the website. That's another opportunity. Say people don't know that you've started offering advisory because you haven't really published it. So you might know that internally, but outwardly you have not put onto the internet that you're offering these new advisory services. Another opportunity could be maybe you've got 20 reviews that mention how well you understand real estate investors and how you're able to really help them, but your website has almost nothing about real estate. So that's another huge opportunity to establish yourself within that niche by having content. The article Lee mentioned about dentists, you could very easily do a similar prompt for real estate investors or any industry and get some great content. There's another opportunity with, a high value question, like I mentioned, that prospects are asking and none of your competitors are answering it either. That's your chance to establish yourself as an expert in that particular area before anybody else in your area has done it. So there's all sorts of ways to create opportunities for yourself or take advantage of opportunities that already exist. New tax laws, for example. And this is a completely different way of thinking about how we create content. Instead of feeding a calendar and saying, oh no, we have to publish on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week, and we're just going to pick a random article topic out of the clear blue sky, you will never run out of content if you're paying attention to all of these opportunity signals because they exist everywhere and they exist every single day. And this is where AI can also become more interesting and really help you.
Yeah, and I'm going to just jump into kind of how we're doing this, and you guys can take it however you want. So the strategy has been, from our point of view, and what we've seen work very well is we start with building, it used to be called a knowledge graph. Companies like Yext used to call them knowledge graphs, and basically think of it as like painting a picture about your firm. So the old days, it was more like contact information, your hours, it was like details that were fairly generic and spread across firms. So like attributes that they all had. And where a knowledge graph with AI has gone and where we have taken it is we basically have created a skill that we as humans, as with strategy, kind of feed. Plus it takes access to all of these conversations within our ecosystem with your clients, those questions they're asking, some gaps you have maybe in services where you have 30 clients that are offering in this vertical. They own gas stations, for example, but you have no content on your site for gas stations, right? And what we've done is created a system that builds up this new kind of knowledge graph on steroids, okay? And what that does is that then can feed every other strategy that we want to go. So let's say we have another skill that kind of looks at your competitors, for example, and areas that you want to rank, whether that be local, where are the gaps, what are the content you need to create. And our AI engine will know your firm. It obviously knows the tax code with Max, our AI system, and it will be able to start formulating, creating very personalized one-to-one kind of content just from your firm. So it's not something that AI slop has done 58,000 times, right? And that's where it gets really interesting. So a system that starts understanding your firm, it understands your services, it understands your specialties, it understands maybe you have certain professionals that work in QSBS stock, for example, right? But more importantly, it understands your clients, your geography, what your reviews are saying, what your existing client content strategy looks like, right? What are these questions? And now it can start formulating what is working, what's not, right? What's becoming stale. And instead of that, your blog is due Thursday, you don't need to do any more homework because the technology has done it for you. So, it basically comes back to you and says, hey, I've looked at this. This is what I found. This is why I think it matters. And this is what I recommend you do. And then it can feel kind of like an assistant, a marketing assistant that's automatically going through all this data and kicking out suggestions. We've taken it a step further where, most of our clients point blank say to us, I just want it to run. I just want it to work. And I just want, and if something comes out perhaps that you don't like, just delete it or edit it, right? It's not that big of a deal. So we have created autonomous skills that will do that exact thing. And they'll analyze your firm. They're going to know your firm inside and out. I was laughing, I've mentioned this before. My daughter plays water polo, and she just committed to a college to play, and we're super excited. And I was actually looking at, their record in the past and what was the single season goals and, all this kind of stuff. And the AI just starts making fun of me. Right. And then it actually knows me so well that we're having a full conversation as if it's a buddy and I, drinking beers and talking about it. And that's what you want your tools, your technology to be able to do for your firm. So I'll go into that. I guess I'll do an example about this, Rebecca, if this helps. So you take that dental firm example, one, more step, and imagine logging in on Monday morning. And you can create agents, by the way. This is not just done in Max, but you can create ChatGPT to do an agent for you that says, every Monday, give me my opportunities. And then you can look at them and decide, out of the topics it found, this is what you should be doing. So, you could say, okay, the agent, if you ask ChatGPT to do it, you come in and there will be a little blue dot and it will say the agent has run, right? And the agent has its responses for you. And then you can start a conversation with that. And it could say, hey, we've noticed increased interest around dentists buying existing practices in your market, right? Maybe it found some articles, maybe it found some posts on Reddit, who knows, right? So you've worked with clients through this process, but your website currently doesn't demonstrate that particular expertise. And then it says, hey, these 3 questions are appearing repeatedly. How should I structure a dental practice acquisition? Should I buy or lease the practice real estate? What are the tax implications when buying a dental practice? And then it could say, we recommend, building a primary guide around buying a dental practice, supporting it with 3 FAQs, doing a short video that you can put on Instagram or a reel on YouTube, and an email to your existing dental clients. That is marketing intelligence. That is your agent or AI proactively doing research for you that you just wouldn't do, or a tool like Max and the skills we've created do for you, and then actually executing it, right? So, imagine the system has already created that first draft using your firm's voice, expertise, and point of view. So you're not starting in that blank state. You're not starting from zero. You're just reviewing, you're adding your judgment, your expertise, your point of view. And that's more of how this firm thinks about this. This is how we would communicate to that clients, not how an AI says we should, okay? And I think that's really important to understand the difference between this and what I call AI slop. And there has been some discussions about Claude adding watermarks. So if you're a heavy Claude user, oh my God, what does that mean? Is now, all the machines know that AI created this content for me. Why does that matter? So Rebecca, if you can this is kind of a current topic. I know you said you've had some people, not in our space, but people you've worked with that kind of mentioned this, but kind of go into this a little bit detail.
Yeah, people I know, people I've worked with are definitely concerned and are seeing kind of the mainstream media hoopla surrounding this. So we do want to address kind of the criticism that comes along with this, because everyone has seen AI slop or negatively written, poorly written AI content. We need to be careful about what we mean by that, because AI slop is not all content that AI helped to write. That definition is very quickly going to become antiquated and useless. So really, in our world, kind of here at CountingWorks, we would view AI slop as content that kind of exists because AI made it cheap and easy to produce, not because someone actually had a useful, accurate, differentiated, timely thing to say. AI slop is repetitive, generic. It's really disconnected from the actual expertise of the firm or the company, regardless of what space there is. Sometimes it can be technically correct, but yet it manages to not say anything. It doesn't really position anyone. It doesn't provide any sort of expertise or insight that any general person wouldn't know. So also in a profession like tax and accounting, there is another risk. Does the system fully understand the subject matter? Is there reliable tax knowledge behind it? Has it been trained on IRS documents? Has it been trained on the tax code? All of these kinds of things. The latest updates, for example. Tax news can very quickly be outdated as things change. So it's very important to understand that just because someone can connect an AI model to a website and generate, 100 or 1,000 tax articles doesn't necessarily mean that's how they should be using an AI system.
Yeah, and I think some of the conversation around AI watermarking gets a little confused too, because the question is, can AI generated content be identified? What model will use it next? Will Google stop showing content? And I think you nailed it. I don't think the issue is should you use AI to help you write. I think it can articulate. I mean, I usually just talk to it. I give it a dialogue of everything that I think, all my points of views. I argue with it. I push back, and I get a very well written article in my voice, my point of view, very quickly. If I try to do that the old-fashioned way, that could take me an entire day, right? And I get it proofed and out the door. So I don't think the idea here is just be concerned, did AI touch this? I don't think there's any issue long-term. It's more as, is this worth reading, right? And if you can now write more efficiently, you can now educate more people than you could before, okay? So, I think that's really important. And you can give your examples, you're giving your expertise, you're giving real client experiences, right? The system can tell very quickly, did an AI with no experience, no expertise, no point of view write something versus a human who has all this experience doing it, right? So AI can help you organize it. It can research pieces of it. And more importantly, it can clean up the language and turn it into a finished article very, very quickly. So I guess the question is, well, then who did write that? Oh, AI wrote it. No, it didn't. I wrote it with an assistant helping me. It's no different than ghostwritten article or books, for if you want to get down to it. So AI certainly helped me create some of the words, but this point of view, the expertise all came from me. So I think it's very important to understand the difference between that curation process and having a knowledge graph about your firm and you versus saying, write 50 SEO articles for my tax and accounting firm. And then AI generates 50 articles on its own, generic, no point of view, no expertise. Who knows if it's hallucinating? Who knows if it's accurate? That's what we're trying to help you understand. So we wanted to get into this a little bit. There's a distinction here. I don't think the problem is AI. It's AI without context, expertise, or judgment. So I think that's really important. And we just wanted to address it because it goes back to our whole point here of, there's firms out there right now that are promising, hey, I'll prompt build you a website. I'll prompt build you articles, basically all this SEO content. And the reality is there's no strategy behind it. There's usually no narrative, and you're going to put out a bunch of AI slop that won't necessarily help you. So now I'm going to go into what firms should be doing today. So Rebecca, This is part 9 of how I analyze this or outline this. And I think this is more actionable things that people can actually do now and get that living website. That is the whole topic of today, is how do you get a website that just doesn't go out there at one point? It learns, it adds content, it adds expertise, it fills gaps, it sees areas of opportunities. So kind of explain a little bit of how that happens, how you go about it, and how you execute it.
Yeah, so if you're sitting here listening to us and you're thinking, okay, my website might actually be one of the ones that's been sitting there for 5 years, don't panic. For starters, you don't have to rebuild the entire site from the ground up tomorrow. You can start with a few questions. So the first one would be, what work do you actually want to do more of? Not every single service that's currently listed on your website, but think about what you want to grow. And then number 2, who do you want that work from? So for example, if you want to start offering more advisory services to business owners, what types of business owners do you want to advise? Is it perhaps physicians or retail store owners, restaurateurs, whatever that segment is? That's a really, really good way to start narrowing down who your website should be appealing to. And then think about, who are the clients where you do your best work? The answer may very well be the same as who is it that you want to work for? Who are the clients you want more of? Who do you understand? And then number 3, what does that person, that prospect, need to believe about your firm before they'll contact you? So this is a little more existential, but you need to think about, how will they know that you understand their industry, that you'll be proactive, that you've dealt with their problem before, that you're approachable, that you understand complicated financial matters perhaps that they're considering? And there are quite a few ways you can prove these things, but if your website isn't proving it right now, you do need to make some changes. Social proof and testimonials are a very easy place to start, with kind of showing people that you've dealt with these problems before and that you'll be proactive. If you have past clients who have left you reviews, connect those to your website, or even just showcase some of them on your website. Let people know, hey, this isn't our first rodeo. We've done this. We've helped people just like you overcome these exact obstacles and issues that you're dealing with right now. And then that's really your starting point. Start looking at all of these things and start taking off bite-sized pieces and making those changes to your website. So then after you've kind of done this assessment, this self-assessment, you can start thinking about the questions that clients are actually asking you in every email, every meeting, every phone call, because those are the questions that are really telling you what your target market wants to know. And then those questions in turn can really become some of your best content and your best marketing assets if you are prompting your AI system with prompts that treat it as an assistant who helps you establish your expertise, not just as kind of a general content mill engine.
Yeah, and I think that will just lead me to kind of wrapping this up and understanding kind of where the future is. So, I would say the first generation of tax and accounting sites, that cookie cutter, design it, launch it, forget it. And then then you got the dinosaur site from that, right? So then people said, well, hey, let me get a template site. They're going to give me contents, but at least I have content going out, which is great. But now we're at the risk of creating, generic content, something that every single firm has. No, it's kind of like as commoditized as you can be, right? The third thing is, now I have the ability with AI to I could do unlimited amount of content, and then now you all of a sudden have AI slop. So that's kind of the evolution of how things have gone. So I believe none of this is the future. What we're doing with our clients has been working really, really well. So the future is a system that understands your firm. Everything that Rebecca just talked about, it can automatically be listening to and integrating and know, hey, we said these things over here, let's say them over there, right? It understands how you're trying to grow. It's able to identify opportunities. It helps you capture the actual expertise of your firm. And more importantly, this now turns into content to help market your practice. So that is the shift from a static website to a living growth system, okay? From a content calendar, the old-fashioned way, Rebecca, which we know what you're talking about, to an opportunity engine, from publishing information to actually demonstrating expertise, specifically personalized to my firm. AI shouldn't make every firm sound the same. That narrative is so important. So if used correctly, AI should, finally make it economically possible for every firm to show the market what makes it different. That's why, we've said before, we're so happy of what we're doing. We're here at CountingWorks. We're basically like an ad agency for the common man, right? And we know we're doing a better job than that $20,000, $30,000 investment if you did it the old-fashioned way, right? Because your firm knows things, your people have experience, you have opinions, you've solved problems, you've answered thousands of client questions. So there's a ton of expertise sitting inside most firms, right? The world never gets to see this. So the opportunity with AI is not to replace all of that with generic content, and that's what a lot of people are doing. It's actually be able to use that content to generate very personalized outputs. And I think that's, the generic versus specific, commodity information versus actual expertise. I think that's really important. So content created because you can versus content created because you should. I think that's where things are going. So that's the opportunity. That is our topic today. So think of your website. If you're putting it out there and it's sitting bad, right? It's not going to get recommended by the search engines. If you are using a cookie cutter site that has no positioning, generic language, also bad. It's harder to get recommended in the modern search engines, ChatGPT, et cetera. So being able now to use technology and agents to be able to personalize all this is really, really strong. So, hopefully you're understanding this and kind of realizing ways to play this as you get ready to market for next year. So Rebecca, did there anything I missed? Or I think, as usual, we covered it pretty well.
I think we did. I can't think of anything else. Hopefully this has been helpful, though, and kind of gives you a better understanding of the difference between AI slop and helpful AI-assisted content, because I think there is a lot of confusion right now, and hopefully this has kind of cleared up the muddy waters for you.
Next week, I hope we're going social. Are we going social, Rebecca?
Yes,
all right.
We are.
So something exciting for most people. And if you're scared of social media, I think it will kind of break down why you shouldn't be. And more importantly, you'll understand why it's so important in the modern marketing strategy. So until next time, thank you for being a listener of the Growth Minded Accountant podcast. We'll see you next week. Thank you.